is cracking, everybody? It's MegapiemanPHD here, and welcome to another Jumpstart developer interview. Today, I'll be talking with Montgomery Goulet from Maestro Interactive Games about their Kickstarter for Luna's Tale. How are you doing today, Montgomery?
I'm doing very well, thanks for having me.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are and what it is you do at Maestro Interactive Games?
Sure, well, I'm Monty Goulet. I'm the audio lead and founder of Maestro Interactive Games. We develop for the Wii U platform, the 3DS, the PlayStation Vita, the PlayStation 3, the PlayStation 4, the Xbox One, what have you. Right now we're developing a title called Luna's Tale. It's a two for all the consoles, actually, including the Ouya as well. We've also previously worked with a Wii U exclusive title called Percy's Predicament, and we're really excited about our next project.
How much money are you guys looking to raise overall for your Kickstarter?
Sure, so we're on Kickstarter asking for $35,000 with an extra $35,000 coming from the Ouya Free the Funds campaign. So overall it's $70,000, but we're only asking the general public for $35,000.
I've heard a couple developers and some good things from the Ouya program, so it's interesting to hear that you guys are going to be utilizing that.
Yeah. There's a couple that have used it successfully, I think. I'm looking at, if you look at their website, they have about 12 to 15 successfully funded programs with that. We decided to go that route because the Ouya is really a neat console, and we also didn't really feel comfortable asking for more money on Kickstarter from the general public. And we figured that there was another way to go about it, and we found it with the Ouya Free the Funds campaign.
Yeah, sometimes you got to be careful when it comes to Kickstarter, because if you start asking for a lot of money, that unfortunately ends up turning people away more than it makes them interested.
Right.
So one of the big things that you have pushed about Luna's Tale on the Kickstarter page is its artwork. Do you want to talk about that a little bit, and what exactly you guys hope to gather from the artwork you're using?
Sure. So we wanted to go with the more hand-painted art style that you see from the Pixar's concept art pages. So you look at what Toy Story was and The Incredibles was before they actually became the computer-generated art. They have a really detailed artwork on the hand-painted side, which we think is a really cool art style to go for. You see a lot of generic platformers that all have like the Mario look to them. We wanted to go with something a little different, which allows us to get a more visual appealing style for the game.
And that kind of makes sense, since the theme of your game does involve toys similar to Toy Story.
Yes, it does. One of the main characters, Proserpina, is Luna's original toy that she got when she was a child. That's kind of decided to go a little amok when she starts getting neglected. Sort of what happens in Toy Story when Woody starts feeling neglected when Andy gets Buzz.
So another thing you guys also pushed on your Kickstarter page is the music. And you, being the audio guy for Maestro Interactive, if you would like to talk about it a little bit, you've mentioned a couple inspirations, such as the Donkey Kong Country series of games. What sort of an idea are you looking for with the music that you have? And from the examples that you actually had on your Kickstarter page, I enjoyed a good amount of it.
Yes. So my past experience was actually working on Donkey Kong Country Returns as one of the audio guys for the Nintendo Wii. So I've had a lot of experience working on listening to the Donkey Kong music over the for the last few years. I really enjoyed that music. I think David Wise and the rest of the team that did those tracks did a really great job encompassing jazz music into a platforming style. I also enjoy what Chikando's done with the Mario games as well, because he's turned it into more of an orchestral kind of fun music style. And we're kind of going for that jazzy quirkiness in our game for the music.
Well, it definitely seems to fit the kind of a game you're going for. The game it's got a unique graphic style, and it's also got some unique musical styles working together for making definitely a different sort of themed platformer than what you would usually see. It's definitely not your run-of-the-mill kind of.
Right. It's more. The artists are trying to make it a little more adult theme, not necessarily like adult concepts, but more of the growing up type aspects and going back to what it means to be a child when you're already like our age, in our late 20s and 30s, and going back to the young years that we kind of reminisce about.
Now, the game, it is a platform game, and you did have a little bit showing off of the actual gameplay on your Kickstarter page, but what is it about Luna's Tale that will make it really stand out against the other platformers, besides just the way it looks or besides just the way it sounds. From what I saw of it, it seemed to be that the character was like a shrunk for part of that. Is that going to be part of the gameplay elements? Will you be changing size, or is there going to be anything kind of like that?
So the overall concept was this is the hard part of trying to convey the game in the initial pitch video, which is Proserpina the doll takes you into her world. She sees it, so everything is I don't know if you play the South Park Stick of Truth game, but there's the part where the gnomes shrink you down and everything's big. But there's it's sort of like that, but you're not actually shrunken down in our game, so it's more of just you're taken to this other world, which is like the Island of Misfit and like toys, but you're your normal size, but everything is kind of coming against you. So that world you saw is the what we're calling as the cardboard world. So it's all like construction papered enemies and environments and cardboard environments. Something you'd create as a young kid if you didn't have the money from your parents to go out and buy the play sets. You'd make them yourself. And we're taking that element and bringing the normal size player into that environment as if they were one of the toys. But then there's other stages as well where you're on a theater stage, for example. There's a whole light and dark motif world, and there's a sandbox desert type environment as well.
You've shown off a couple different enemies within the actual Kickstarter page. How is Luna herself going to be able to deal with those? Is it going to be more of your classic style of Mario platforming, or is she going to have like some sort of abilities or powers or something like that?
So some of them are going to be more of in terms of platforming the Mario-esque, where you can jump on their heads and they'll disappear or die, what have you. And the other ones are Luna's going to have a specific ability that she unlocks at the end of certain worlds. So in, for example, the Puppet World, you're fighting this big Marionette boss, which is one of your toys, like sort of like in Yoshi's Story, where Kamek comes and he makes them really, really big. And so the Puppet boss is basically a big version of a Marionette puppet that Luna has. And then once you defeat the boss, that puppet shrinks back down to its normal size, and you can use that to rope swing across things. Another one is a T-Rex that shoots fireballs out of it, and another one is a toy box that spawns a kickball. So there's going to be lots of different ways to defeat the enemies aside of the normal routine jumping on their heads.
You've mentioned that you are going to have a couple different worlds. About how many worlds or levels do you currently have planned for the game?
So we have total 4 to 5 worlds. We haven't decided how many levels you're going to be in them. We're thinking probably between 3 to 4 to keep it sort of even, so probably 20 to 40 levels total. We don't want to overstretch ourselves and overreach and make a Mario-sized game where it's 80 levels plus, as we are a small team.
You don't want any Bomberman 99 levels to have to go through.
No. It's more of a storytelling experience in our minds, so we're trying to keep it sort of on the scope-wise of levels a little lower. Plus, there's 2 artists, so it's kind of, in terms of that, there's a lot of art to be done with just those 5 worlds alone.
You talked about the story a little bit earlier, but how is the story necessarily going to be told? Is it going to be cutscenes? Is it going to be text box? Is it just going to be stuff that you pick up from your surroundings as you go through the game? So
we're doing cinematic cutscenes throughout each world and at the beginning of the game as well. So the intro of the game is going to have sort of like the teaser trailer we launched. That's going to be Luna with the doll as a young child, and then it goes on to where she meets her boyfriend, and the doll starts to get neglected, and then their cutscene will be the doll actually, turning the world around her into the living toy box, basically. And following that up, each world is going to have its own cinematic scene to tell like what's happening with the bosses and what's happening with the characters, and changing of the world as well.
Definitely sounds interesting, and to see how things would change as you go throughout the story to figure out all the things that are changing and all the stuff that's going on.
Yeah, I mean it's going to be a very interesting story to tell, that's for sure. We're trying to play one of the motifs we're trying to play off is fears that you had as a child. So and going back as an adult and facing those fears again.
I noticed that with some of the tracks that you were showing off on the page for the music. One of them was like the closet-themed world, which seemed like a definitely not something you would always see an entire world off the theme of a closet.
Oh, sure. So the closet is more of we're trying to do the light and dark motif with the closets. So there's going to be levels sort of like Donkey Kong Sphere Factory where the lights go on and off. Blackout Basement. I mean, there's going to be levels with where you only see so some of the enemies are basically like little robots that have like lights on them. So you'll only see those as you're moving through the platforms. So there's going to be different challenges throughout that world that are not going to be seen throughout the rest of the game. But will definitely impact the player in some way.
I always like that kind of a thing when they do stuff like that. I know Donkey Kong Country Returns had some factory levels that were kind of like that for a little bit, and it looked really cool. So I'll be looking forward to how you guys decide how to do that for your particular.
Yeah, we're really looking forward to that as well. It's going to be an interesting world to create.
Now, this is not Maestro Games' first project. You've worked on a couple projects previously, but this is, from what I've seen of the project currently on, most of your previous projects were all in 3D, whereas this one is in 2D. Would you mind talking about a little bit about what you've previously done, and if it's necessarily more difficult to go to 2D than 3D, and how those are different?
Sure. So our last project was a Wii U exclusive called Percy's Predicament. It was a 3D casual puzzle game, sort of like Super Monkey Ball, but more geared towards just having fun. And the issue we had was, in terms of 3D, since you bring that up, is being that we're a small studio, we can't compete with the people who have like a team of, let's say, 30 3D modeling artists and 3D texture artists and what have you that can create something that looks really, really incredible from a 3D perspective. But we do have some really talented 2D artists who have done a lot of work in visual novels and Zynga games as well that, have been able to show off their 2D skills. So we wanted to shift from the 3D to more of something that really suits the artist's abilities. And in terms of difficulty, I would say they're about the same, but because you have to think about different art styles and gameplay elements that you have to do for 3D versus 2D. So we're doing a 2.5D game, so we still have to think of that Z-axis as well when we're building the level design. So there's going to be like falling aspects that are coming from the background to the front that you'd have to, the artists still have to render a sprite that looks sort of 3D, but it's not a 3D model per se.
That was what I was going to ask when you said 2.5D. When I think of 2.5D, it's usually like a 3D, like polygons just in a 2D plane. So, but nothing in your game is necessarily going to look 3D or be 3D. They're just going to be how the background interacts with the foreground.
True. So it's going to be more of like the 2.5D that they had for SNES, the SNES era, where it was more like, the Donkey Kong was all pre-rendered like 2D sprites that were just on different layers that made it appear 3D. Whereas in ours, it's a big, it's all hand painted, so it's one plane that's going to have multiple layers that appears 3D, and then the background can also interact with the player's foreground.
How many people do you guys have working at Maestro Interactive at the moment?
Myself included, there are 4 developers. There's 2 artists, a designer, and myself doing audio, and we're also doing double dipping on programming as well.
It's that's a pretty average team when it comes to indie games. You don't usually see more than 5 people on an indie team.
Right. Yeah, they stick to 5 or 6 or so. It depends on the scope of the projects. This one, we probably want to add 1 more artist just because the workload is so art heavy in this type of game that, they're going to get strained after a while.
You've talked that you previously were working on audio for a game like Donkey Kong Country Returns. Is it that much different than when you were working on that game with a much larger team than, I assume a larger team, I don't actually know, than it is when you're working with your own team on your own titles?
Yes and no, because as working on a bigger team, you're at a MI position specifically, you're in a lower point on the totem pole, so you're not, privy to all the stuff that's going on the overarching gameplay elements. So you're designing sound effects for characters, but you actually still don't necessarily know what the character is going to be used for. Mm-hmm. Whereas being in a smaller setting like this, I'm able to just turn around, look at what the artist is building, and talk to the design guy and say, where is this going in the game? And then I can create the sound design work that goes with that a lot easier than I would at a bigger company.
Right. So instead of just being a cog in a bigger machine, you're kind of one of the main people making the decisions.
Right.
So there's always one question I like to ask everyone I get the chance to interview, and that is, what was it that made you want to make games? Being a person who I haven't really talked to many people who were audio centered, so I don't necessarily know if you went towards that first and then worked your way over. How was it that you were like, okay, I want to make games, and then actually go to making them?
Sure. So I had originally wanted to do like the sound, like the compositions for the games when I was younger. So I went to school for that. I'm a saxophone player for music technology and music industry to learn more about getting into the composition side of things for games and films. But the difficulty for that was, in terms of games, most of the audio for games that I would have wanted to work on are done in Japan, or they're, scores that are licensed out like band soundtracks. So you have Grand Theft Autos where the score, there may be a couple of atmospheric tracks, but it's really just a whole bunch of different recording artists that they license the music from, whereas the Nintendo products are all primarily done in Japan in terms of composition. So my field for that was very limited. Then I sort of got into the sound design role of doing video games, and that's how I got the Donkey Kong Country stuff. And I followed that up by saying, I really don't want to be building games, like doing the design for weapon type games, which is what most of the Western games do, is the violent shooter games. Mm-hmm. So I didn't want to stick to that, because I always felt like, even though there's really cool elements you could do for that, it still sounds very generic when you're having, I can go from playing Call of Duty and I say, all right, here's the pistol for Call of Duty. And then you go from Call of Duty and you can go to something else and hear the very similar pistol sound, but they're two different designers doing two different game companies. So I decided to branch out and do my own stuff.
That makes sense. It's like you heard one gun, you've pretty much heard them all.
Yeah. I mean, don't get me wrong, I think the Battlefield guys are really talented in terms of their audio, because they actually go out and, professionally get the real weapons to get the sound effects from. My opinion is just, if you hear one gun sound, you've heard them all.
Yeah, pretty much. So, the Kickstarter, how much money have you guys currently raised?
Yeah, 4,000 or so. So we're sitting at about 12%. We just did a backer-only update where we're doing a referral thing, where we're just saying, hey guys, if you bring in another person, we're going to do something for you and the person you bring in. We haven't said what it is yet, but we're promising it's going to be something really exciting for them, so we hope it brings more people to the campaign. Right now, we're just trying to get more backers into it, because we still want to do the updates after the campaign, whether it succeeds or not. Mm-hmm. We still want to keep everyone privy and in the loop, since the game will still be in development.
So, you think you will be able to keep working on it, but just not as in grand of scale as you wanted to if the Kickstarter doesn't actually succeed?
We're not really sure in terms of the grander scale. We had a team meeting today about it. So right now we're looking at other options as well. We're talking to a couple of the different publishers about it. We're looking at a whole bunch of different avenues in terms of funding the game right now. We also do a lot of contract work, which certainly helps.
That was one of the things I wanted to ask about, since you had previously worked with other companies that were publishers. Why did you decide to go to Kickstarter instead of trying to work with someone you had previously worked with?
Well, in terms of ourselves, we were lower in the scheme of things. We weren't on the biz dev side, so we didn't really directly work with the publishers. Our publisher when I was working was Nintendo, so it was they're over in Japan. Mm. And I only got to meet with them a couple of times when they came over to check out the game near the end of development. One of our other developers was from Edge of Reality, and they were working on a product as one of the many design guys. He never really got to do the biz dev side and see where the publishers came. So we hadn't really had too many dealings with publishers per se ourselves, so we didn't want to start that route, especially when they always tend to ask for a lot of gameplay to be finalized, which is costly in terms of upfront development time. Mm-hmm. When they ask to see a vertical slice or a first playable type concept, and it always never ends up being what the final product is, but it's always time consuming to build that out just to get the we already have a platformer game in the works.
Yeah, I've heard that kind of stuff, and some prototypes that they look good, they're not done, but they're looking for something that's almost finished before they actually invest.
Right. So we were considering doing that aspect of it and actually doing that, but it seemed like a better way to go was to actually go to the crowd and see if we could get their support. And it turns out we got a lot of the Wii U crowd hungry for the game, which is I guess they all say it's suited for their platform more so than the other ones. But we're still going for all the consoles just because we want to get it out to as many people as possible.
Now, you have talked about the Wii U, and how would you incorporate a game like this into the Wii U, considering the Wii U works on two screens at once? You have the tablet screen and you have the screen on your TV. And that seems to be a big thing for a lot of developers for putting the games on Wii U. They don't necessarily know what to do with the hardware that they're given, since they have to work simultaneously with these two different things.
Right. In terms of us, we were probably just going to do the off TV experience where it's just it'll be on both screens at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
But we were trying to figure out new ways to incorporate the gamepad into this type of game. It's just certain things are a little tricky. You might do touchscreen where you can summon the 3 different abilities that Luna can get after she acquires them from the gamepad tablet rather than from the gamepad screen, rather than having to press a button. But there's really not so much you could actually do in terms of fun gameplay mechanics that you could cross over from the gamepad onto the consoles.
Right. You said something about abilities, and I'm kind of afraid that we haven't actually talked too much about the gameplay of the game. We talked that it'd be a platformer, but what are these abilities that you would get throughout the game? What are all that kind of stuff that you would be able to do?
So you have, as you progress through the game, you unlock 3 different abilities. One's a rope swing mechanic. You start off, you can in the game, there's actually going to be rope swings that you'll learn how to use, but later on you'll be able to summon them at key points in the game and key areas that you can unlock, hidden secret areas and stuff like that to get the secret rewards, what have you. And then another one is a fireball that you can use to unlock the same kind of thing or to destroy enemies with. And the third one is a kickball that you run into and kick it to knock certain levers down to access new areas and to basically immobilize the enemies, not necessarily kill them, just make them have the disease, cartoony stars above their head.
So, for the most part, these abilities are a plus to what you can already do, and not necessarily something outside of maybe the rope swing ability. It's something that you would specifically need to utilize to get through areas, or are the levels going to be designed that you have to learn how to use these abilities, and they're more of a focus?
Sure. So the way we're doing it is, so for the first or second world, we haven't decided which one we're going to go with first. We're kind of leaning towards the Carver one that we just showed off to be the first intro type setup into this fantasy world. But the way we had it set up originally was the puppet theater world was going to be first, but it just seems a little too abstract from the original beginning of the game.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of that first ability you unlock is the rope swing, which in some of the puppet stages and cardboard stages you'll have regular rope swings that you'll have to swing across to get through levels. And then once you beat the boss and unlock that ability, you can go back to those levels and use it in different places, or you can just use it further on throughout the game as a way to get past certain enemies. It's only going to be the rope swing isn't necessarily like a cheat where you can just spawn it anywhere. There's going to be like key locations you can use it at.
Mm-hmm.
And the fireball one is that one is basically the infinite ammo type weapon that you can just keep firing like Mario's fireball. So yeah, you can use it to get past enemies, but it's not necessarily a game-changing element that's going to be like, if I don't use this, I can't beat the level.
Right. Now, you said a little bit of backtracking. Is that just going to be for getting collectibles, or are there going to be like secret levels, secret areas you could find?
Sure. So we're going to probably do branching paths that you can unlock through secret environments that you'd unlock in certain levels using these abilities. So for example, if you have to use that rope swing to climb up something that was inaccessible before, mm-hmm. that might be a path to another level that you have to unlock to 100% the game.
Are these other paths going to lead to different endings, or are they just going to be purely for extra something to play and feed into your percentage?
Sure. So they're just they're more just to play. We may have some story elements in them, but it's not going to. If you miss them, it's not going to ruin the ending of the game.
That makes sense. Sometimes you can get a little bit variation of the ending, but it's definitely nice to just have something else to do. I remember in the Crash Bandicoot games, they would always have extra levels you could unlock, at least in 2 and 3, where you could just go through that to get, I believe you get 105% in one of those. So
Right.
that was kind of ridiculous. But you did talk a bit about collectibles. Are the collectibles just going to be for the sake of collecting, or are they going to unlock more levels or more abilities or anything like that?
So they're more just for the sake of 100% in the game. You know, they're also going to be, if you collect all the ones in a level, you'll get the generic 1-up that most platformers do. So we're not sticking with Mario's collect 100 coins. We're just doing the like the K and G letters from Donkey Kong, where if you get those, you get the 1-up.
So your game is going to incorporate a lives system. There have been a lot of platformers nowadays who the main focus that they've had short but more difficult levels and give you an infinite number of lives. Are you going to be kind of like the longer live system levels from back in the day?
In our game, we're not going to do the generic way of like the old school Mario, where if you run out of lives, you have to start back at World 1-1. We think that's a little unfair to the players even nowadays, so we will have a save system in the game, but it's also not going to be like the Marios of today, where after like World 1-5, you have 99 lives to beat the game with. It's just not gonna. That's just no fun either, because then there's no risk, no reward type setup there. So we definitely are going to make it a little more challenging in terms of getting the lives, but we're also not going to make it too challenging where you're back down to 0 and have to start back at the beginning.
That's definitely understandable. You wouldn't want to have, depending upon how long the game is. One of the reasons why they would have did that back in the day is because it would just extend the playtime of the game. But then, depending on how long the game is, you wouldn't want to have to constantly play World 1-1 over and over and over again. I think
Right.
didn't someone like speedrun World 1-1 like just a couple of seconds or something for Mario? I mean, that's ridiculous to play it that much.
Yeah, I'm sure somebody probably has at that speed.
All right. Well, thank you very much for talking to me today, Montgomery, from Maestro Interactive Games, about your Kickstarter for Luna's Tale. Do you have any contacts or website or anything that people can use to keep tabs on what you guys are doing and how the game is developing?
Sure. So the game itself is going to be at www.lunastale.com. Our Twitter handle is maestro_iGames, and our website is maestroigames.com. And thank you so much for having me and listening to this interview.
No problem. No problem. Thank you, viewers, for watching. Thank you, Montgomery, for joining me today. If you are interested in this game, please do head over to his Kickstarter page, check it out, and if you got some extra money, send it them away, because, as you know, Kickstarter projects, they don't happen unless they get funded, and this game definitely seems interesting. It's got a great art style, it's got some very good music to go along with it, and it's got some pretty interesting ideas to build up a interesting platformer for this day and age. Thank you once again for joining me. I have been MegapieMan. This has been a Jumpstart developer interview, and I'll talk to you guys later.